Hey everyone, as I mentioned in the title, this is a video meant to help white people, especially white Americans, understand our own culture and how it impacts our interactions with non-white people and maybe even among ourselves. Before I go any further, I want to share a simple disclaimer. I'm not an expert on anything, be it activism, race relations, or really any other type of relationships for that matter. I do have lived experience as a white person who grew up in the South in a predominantly white neighborhood with a conservative family. Any conclusions I have came as the result of extremely patient friends from many different ethnic backgrounds and positions on the LGBTQ spectrum. So this is a great segue into an important thought I want to share with you. If you're friends with individuals from another culture or sexual orientation, and they tell you that something you've said is racist or any other type of homo or transphobic, they're trying to help you be a better person. And also keep in mind, it took a lot of courage for them to say something to you. None of us likes telling our friends something that is going to hurt their feelings. They're doing it to help us grow as people. And on that note, growth is usually painful. A close friend of mine who is black reminded me recently of a time in high school when he called me out for making a racist comment. It felt awful. There was like a sickening shame that just seemed to spread throughout my entire body. And this is a normal reaction, and especially as white people, we're not as experienced considering our impacts. And these feelings can be kind of unbearable. And you might experience the desire to protect yourself by saying something like, "Oh, well, I didn't mean it like that," or some other invalidating response that's actually designed to save our own ego. And frankly, in many circumstances, we really didn't mean to make an offensive comment. However, it turns out that it was offensive anyway. I would encourage you to experience that discomfort. Just pause, let it flow through you, apologize concisely, and if you're not sure why your comment was viewed offensively, just ask. Something we have to keep in mind is that other white people wrote the history books we learned from in school. And those authors often omitted crucial information that would probably prevent us from making some of these faux pas. And you might be thinking, well, but if it wasn't taught to us in school, how is it our fault for not knowing? And the real answer is, it's not your fault, at least initially. But if you experience a teaching moment like the one I just described, it's on you again if you keep making the same mistakes. The same is also true about white privilege. It's not your fault that you have it. It's not a personal attack on you if someone tells you that you're being privileged. It's a fact of life in our country. I have it. If you're white or white passing, you also have it. There's little we can do today to get rid of it, but by being aware of the fact that we experience the world in a profoundly different way than our non-white and non-heteronormative friends, we can be better friends and allies to them. Speaking of friends, this is something that all white people with non-white friends need to know. Those friends are being so patient with you in ways that you may not even know. Remember when I said that if you experience a teaching moment, keep making the same mistakes as on you? Guess what? You're going to make another mistake. It's going to happen. Even the most racially conscious white person is going to overlook something. But that sounds so unfair, you might be thinking. Which brings us to an extremely important cultural touchstone for us. White culture is obsessed with the idea of fairness. How many times have you heard a friend complain that it's not fair for universities to save openings for minority applicants? Or that it's not fair that we can't wear culturally sacred clothing to a party? Or even that it's not fair that only black people can say the N-word and we can't? White people love for things to be fair, and that's why we're so quick to call the manager at the grocery store when things aren't going the way we expected them to be going. Here's a big thing to keep in mind though. Although we're used to things being more or less predicated on fairness, the world has been extremely mind-bogglingly unfair to basically every other group in the world that isn't white. I don't necessarily want to go through the entire list because that would take years, but we can highlight some big ones. Colonization, slavery, forcing people to learn English and forget their native culture, Jim Crow, mandatory minimums, marriage laws, the list can go on and on and on. So when we say, but that's not fair, your extremely patient friends of color and other persuasions might outwardly validate your frustrations because they're good friends. But it's pretty likely that internally they're hoping we begin to see that life has really only been fair for white people, and that this fairness only exists because we created a system that makes life harder for everyone else. So in a sense, life isn't fair for white people either. It's extremely unfair, but just on the other end of the spectrum. And again, if you're white, this isn't exactly your fault personally. However, it would be really helpful to keep this in mind when you talk to your friends, coworkers, significant others, anyone else who's not white. You may have recently noticed how unfair police interactions seem to be for black people especially. Because we as white people walk through the world with cards stacked in our favor, it may be easy for us to doubt claims of unlawful conduct about our police. It's likely that our interactions with them have been limited and relatively positive. Like maybe they helped us out when we needed it or helped us feel safe. And even if they didn't, maybe they let you off with a warning instead of a speeding ticket, or if you got arrested, they handcuffed you and put you in the car without beating you first for resisting. We have to keep in mind that just because we didn't personally observe differing treatment by these systems that we think are fair, doesn't mean that it's not happening. I would encourage you to ask a non-white friend if they've ever had an experience with racism. Sometimes, as white people, it can actually be really hard for us to hear about people we care for being treated badly because of their race. It can be so overwhelming that we try to make them feel better by saying things like, oh, well, it probably wasn't about race, or I don't think that's what they meant. And these statements can actually be really invalidating and are for our benefit, not our friends. So we're much better off just listening. And that brings me to another major point. Culturally, we love to tell other people groups how to make things better. We're very certain in our ability to improve upon existing ideas, so much so that we sometimes just take things from other cultures without even acknowledging their source. Rock and roll is a great example, as is basically all contemporary slang. When we're meeting with a group of non-white people, we often want to share our own experiences, and we really want to help improve upon the ideas we're hearing. And this is largely because in school, teachers were less likely to make us question whether to raise our hands. We grew up feeling like our experiences are extremely valuable and have no second thoughts about sharing them. Just keep in mind this isn't the experience of our non-white friends. So back to my point, as white people interacting with our non-white and non-heteronormative friends, the best thing we can do is listen, and listen without commenting even. We may not agree with what's going on. I recognize this may be somewhat controversial, but personally, I haven't agreed with every single decision the Black Lives Matter movement has made. However, I didn't criticize them, and this is why. As white people, we've been allowed to make all sorts of mistakes, like slavery or taking land from Native Americans. And eventually we figured out we were wrong, but only after having the freedom to make those mistakes. I feel like it would be best for us to extend that freedom to other groups and allow them to figure out where they need to place the boundaries. And then also bear in mind that we still haven't really fixed those two mistakes I just listed. Returning to our culture's obsession with fairness, what might look like a group saying, we don't feel comfortable with you wearing that fabric or pattern, it's special to our culture, might not feel fair to us, especially if we're white people who consider ourselves culturally informed. However, just keep in mind that no one's ever colonized our culture, and so no one's really taken anything sacred from us and sold it for profit, like we did with tobacco, for example. When someone takes something sacred and you finally regain the ability to protect it again, you're probably going to be extremely cautious before you allow others to become involved. Extending this kind of understanding to non-white groups will help your interactions with them. And it goes back to the idea that perhaps things have never been fair for them or for us. Especially right now, many of us white folks are desperately wanting things to get better for our non-white and other friends. And we may feel at a loss as to what to do next. Maybe we already donated to several Black activist causes and went to all the marches. In my opinion, the best thing we can do is educate our own people. And it can be a lot more challenging than you think. Maybe you're at Thanksgiving dinner and your uncle complains about reverse racism. It could be faster and easier to yell at him and say, That stuff doesn't exist. You're a racist. Don't talk to me anymore, and storm away. However, this only serves to continue the divide between you and doesn't educate your family member. As white people, one of our biggest privileges right now is that we're not directly, personally affected by systematic racism. And this distance can help us remove our emotions in a way that's a lot more difficult for our non-white friends whose lives are literally being threatened right now. We can say to our family member, what makes you feel like reverse racism is happening? And they might tell you about a coworker who grew up poor, the only white person in a black neighborhood where he or she was picked on for being white, and you'll listen and maybe express some sympathy, saying like, wow, that's rough, no one should ever be bullied for their race. Then you can say, but I'm wondering if maybe the reason that it's not considered racism the same way is because your friend had a white name, and that makes them a lot more likely to be hired at an office job, which allows them a much higher chance of getting out of the poverty, even if they're just as poor as the people around them. And your family member might say something dismissive, so be patient, because we, meaning white people, created this entire system, so it's up to us to take responsibility for dismantling it and educating as many of our people as we can. I want to close with a personal anecdote. I was on the subway when a young black man stepped onto the train shirtless and gesticulating wildly. All of you white people, get the hell off the train or I'm going to kill you, he said. Immediately I thought, I'm not going to get off the train. Then I looked at him and I realized he was really high on PCP and he might be willing to do anything. So I did change cars at the next stop, and so did most of the black people because they recognized that this guy was also crazy. So we began moving again, and an older black woman saw that a middle-aged white lady was visibly shaken. And she said, "Are you all right, dear?" And this was an extremely moving gesture to me because our people are still making black people fear for their lives because of their race on a daily basis, and we've been doing so since they arrived in this country hundreds of years ago. So if for like 3 minutes in 2017 I had that feeling, I consider it to be a blessing. Remember, discomfort is a sign of growth. And also remember, if you're fortunate enough to have a non-white friend tell you that you're woke, it only means for that specific moment on that specific issue, not forevermore on all issues. Each day is a new day, full of opportunities for us white people to become better attuned to the world around us. And please, if you're white, never refer to yourself as woke. I know it might not seem fair, but it just doesn't work like that. Thanks for listening.